All right, so we're going to take a look at painting a CNC carved sign. We're going to do an elk this evening. I just want to go through some of the basics of how I paint pieces like this. So what the tools are that I use, and then we'll walk through. It's a 24-inch diameter little elk welcome sign that's heading down to Montana. So try to give you some hints and clues. I'll show you a little bit about my setup here before we get started. So this is I use acrylics. I buy them in bulk. I used to buy them in gallon cans. I find these are just very useful. And these are the primary colors. So I'm doing everything with just the 5 primary colors. The exception being is that I don't use a black at all. I use this, which is called Payne's Gray. And Payne's Gray is, I call it the magic paint. It's very good for shading, and it's really a very dark blue gray that's does some miracles and stuff. So I have that. I got really 4 brushes that I mostly use over here sitting in water. And then my palette's already ready, a little bit of each paint. The piece, of course, is ready. I have this big 1.5 inch, 2-inch brush from Lowe's. It's about $1. I have already gone through and put a single coat of titanium white on here over top of the wood. I also have a hair dryer that I'll be using, and I have a small iPad with reference pictures on it that I use. People ask, do you just paint from your head, or do you use reference pictures? What do you do? I'm guilty of using reference pictures, and I got an elk painting I did in the background that'll help too on this one. So yeah, let me get started. So the trick, what we're going to try to do on this one is I'm going to try to do there's really only a couple elements on here that the client wanted. There's some grain down here. This is the highland area of Montana, north central Montana. It's just wheat country, but these are the sweetgrass hills up here, and there's a beautiful little set of hills called the Sweetgrass, and I copied the skyline of those. I'm going to paint those in here, maybe put a little bit of a sunset in behind them, and then have the elk kind of backlit by the sunset. So we're going to try to do that first, and then go from there. So this, just put in, I'm just mixing paint right here on the palette. I'm going to give you guys a look at some of this, but we'll go back and forth a bit, see how this works. A little bit of water, a little bit of, does it sound like a Bob Ross video? Just mixing some put some, and then I'm just gonna go in here. Now, one of the things I love about painting CNC carvings is it's more like working in a kid's coloring book than it is painting flat like art, like that piece on the back wall. You know, the whole way through that, you're trying to figure out what's the elk shape look like and all that. Well, here, if you picture this, the elk's drawn out. You can't screw up how the elk looks. It's already there. And so are the mountains. And so most of this, you'll see, I paint from the back out. So you watch as I do. And a little bit deeper, richer sky up top, and then it's going to fade down. This is all just mixing the base blue and titanium white. And it's not a problem to paint over stuff, because we're going to paint whatever's in the background first and get that done. And so this is not some delicate process with a paintbrush. I'm cramming stuff in and beating on it, and this is also how I deal with a canvas, but with wood, it's a little bit more necessary. So then in between, one of the things we'll be watching is we'll change the water out pretty often, but I clean that off because I want to get closer back to a little bit lighter color down here. Now, here's the great thing about acrylics. acrylics will dry in about, in a room where it's like this, it's 70 degrees in here, the acrylics will dry in about 7 or 8 minutes. So you have time to do blending like I just did. You have a few minutes to do that. But when you're done blending, this is why I have a hair dryer here. Now, I want to start putting some yellow and red in there, but if I just try to put those on top of the blue, it's going to turn into purple or pink, or the yellow is going to maybe turn green, and I don't want that. So what I want to do is set. So that blue is locked in now. It just takes a minute or two in a room like this with a hair dryer to lock that paint in, and now you can really play over top of it. One of the things you want to learn is how to fix problems. So like right now, I could paint all over that blue right up there, and if I didn't like it with a slightly damp cloth, you could just wipe it off. So there's some ways to back up out of what you're doing. But so we're gonna work a bit on the sunset in here. A little bit of play with this a bit. You can see I'm going right over the horns again. I just don't get worried about doing that, because the last thing we're going to paint is these higher raised areas, and it's easier to come back and paint over the top of them when and I to some degree, I guess I consider myself a production painter. I enjoy doing slower fine art pieces that I'm really trying to get to look a certain way. I'm going to put a bit of bring in a little bit of blue up here because I like the way this guy actually kind of turns. There's just a tiny bit of green in the sky as it does if you. One of the things you'll learn when you start playing with this stuff, especially when we get down to the trees here, your homework assignment is going to be to go look at what the real colors on a tree. A little bit of that. So take my smaller little quarter brush and actually put I'm going to have the sun be right in here. All right, so that's enough on the sky for right now. We'll I can see I'm going to tilt this a bit more so you see a little bit less of the shadows that are being cast on that. We'll put it into some better light when we wrap up here, but this light works for me. Then I'm going to go with the kind of Purple Mountains Majesty, and I'm going to just mix. Again, I'm going to come down here and I'm going to mix some of my red and blue and just make some purple. I'll bring in some titanium white to lighten that up a lot more, and we'll get a real nice kind of Purple Mountains Majesty thing going on here in a second. And that's what's going on down out here where you can't see what's happening. Just some paint mixing. So I'm going to want, and you can, so another great thing about carving. So when I design CNC art that I know I'm going to be painting, if you carve it right where that's lifted up, the painting process is so much easier because you can just drag over. You can see you can kind of drag over the edge and not touch what's below it, which it doesn't really matter because we're going to paint over that anyway down here in a minute. And these hills kind of wander over here. And I probably a little bit redder than put in just a little bit of yellows and got it. So this that's kind of looks. I'm looking at that as maybe a little bit darker than I want, so I'm going to just go back in and try to lighten some of that up a bit. If we were all sitting in a classroom doing this together, every one of us would paint this a little bit differently, and that's just part of the thing. So as you get used to mixing colors, you'll get better at getting to where you want to get with your colors on that. So then if we wanted there to be, for example, just a little bit of snow up in those hills, you know, it's sort of, and the sun's coming from that side, we would come in here and pop in a little bit of snow coming down there, maybe some there. And then what happens right here, where it goes back into the sunny side, it comes out of the sun, it goes in the shadow, that snow will pick up a blue color from, so we'll just have a little bit of that like that. So there's a little bit of, see if I can come in close enough where you can see what's going on up there, but there we go. So there's just a hint of snow back in the hills back there. So come back out. If I had Zoom, I would zoom in and out and be much smoother, but since I don't have Zoom, I'm just carrying the camera around for you. So then I'm gonna fill in, I'm gonna use some umber and titanium white and yellow and just get this all kind of just filled in. Just, this is a wash. So what I'm doing here is mostly water. There's almost no paint in that. So you can see the grain. We're going to do one class one night just on doing washes and how to use them. Some of you guys have some, we don't have much in the way of pretty wood up here. It's just all kind of gnarly old pine from the box stores. And this is particularly gnarly piece. It didn't have a lot of so you can see this is not, this is not a dabbing and being very careful because it's, because like I said, it's a little bit like paint by numbers. You can sort of just fill in the cube, the areas. So right now we're going to fill in everything outside of this elk. We're going to try, where we're going to really spend some quality time is on the elk, trying to get it to look sort of gorgeous. And that's how that'll work. So then we'll try to, we're gonna so let's just, now I'm going to try to create what I would call a little bit of terrain, just the illusion of depth back behind it. You could just leave that the way it is for right now, but we're going to go back in and grab some of that purple that we used in the mountains, very washed down, and we'll just sort of And what we're doing is creating the illusion of some terrain out there. There's more to this than just a flat field. So we're going to help the human eye fill that in. You can see I'm not spending a lot of time on that, but it's just this illusion that that's not just an unbroken plane of flatness. So you can do this with your CNC machine, or you can do it with paint. So sometimes I'll add in, I'm doing a Christmas one tomorrow, and I kind of feel that there's a tree that should be in that I left out. So I'm gonna go back in, and there's not a tree in the actual carving. So can you see that? It kind of creates a little bit of an illusion. We do have the sun down kind of low, so then I'm gonna go back in with the same brush and just create. So we'll create some dark areas, and let's give some spots that are a little bit, might be the sun's hitting. And there's a mistake right there. So too much of a gob. Put some sun highlights on some of this grain. It's like a distant tree line over there. It's kind of put in a little bit more of that. So what we've, in just a few minutes, really, we've kind of blocked in the background of this piece. I still not happy with the sunset, but I can still come back and play with that a little while. We've put in some dark shadows underneath where the grain is, and we're going to play some more with the grain. But mostly, let's go see if we can get that elk to start to pop now. So, the stuff in the background, I can kind of leave it alone, and we'll try to get the eyes to focus in on this elk. So again, I'm using this burnt umber, that brown. Might have to make a run out to the Jones giving me a hall pass, so I'm painting in the house right now because we have better Wi-Fi in here. But so I don't have all my painting supplies right here. They're actually out in the garage. So I tend to paint in big blocks like this just to get paint on the critter or on the piece, and then we'll work on highlights and shadows. I'm trying to get rid of all the wood right now, so we can just start to see where this elk is kind of at. Then I'm going to use some of my burnt umber and the Payne's gray. And an interesting thing about like doing this whole, what I would call the mane of this elk, we're crushing paint down into the deeper areas of this. So the wonderful thing about carvings is they create their own shadows. You can see it on this piece before I ever started painting, that there was shadows on it. And but painting allows us to accentuate the shadows and bring them out a bit more. So you can see I've painted down off the neck of this moose again, or this moose, yeah. I've done too many moose up here in Alaska. But I've painted down onto the background, and I'll come back and clean that up in a little bit. But again, this is what I'm doing, is blocking out the big color areas on this elk, and then we'll come back and we'll detail them out and soften some of them up a bit and try to capture more of what's actually going on there in the now here's, I mean, on raised letters on signs and stuff, it's a lot like these antlers. You can, I mean, it's not, I'm using a great big 3/4 inch wide flat brush to do, and a lot of guys get caught up and they're trying to go in with a little tiny brush to do this stuff. And I just, if the file's designed well and the antlers or letters or whatever it is stand up above the rest of the carving, then you should be able to just really essentially drag the brush across that raised area. Now, what I don't do is I'm not painting around the edges of those things, because I want those antlers to be raised out and away from it. So at the sides of the antlers up in here and here are painted the same color as the sky. And it was very important to do that when we were painting the sky, to get that all covered. Because I just want that when you get to the side of the painting, I want that to look like, if someone looks at it from the side, they should see sky behind the antlers. They shouldn't see the antlers going far back deep into the artwork, into the environment of what's there. So now you do this, and then I start to see, this is when you start to spot areas you've missed. Like I clearly missed some stuff back in here. I'll go back in with a smaller brush, and I do have these smaller brushes that I use to go back and poke and get color back in where I miss spots, because I go pretty quick. So I'll clean up some of this. Here's a little bit of clean those up. And sometimes these elk have these really pretty ivory tips on the antlers, and we'll try to get a bit of that illusion in here. Inside of the ears, there's usually a white area around the So this is, now the whole piece is blocked in, and I don't know how, I'm not keeping track of this, but it's not where I want it to be by any means, but the big bulk of the paint is on there. We got a screaming bright sunset or sunrise behind, or sunset. This would be a sunset, I think, because of the way the mountains are facing there. And then, so now I go back in and start playing with how to put highlights on the elk and where there would be shadows on him and detail. I'm trying to make it look more, because what we've done is you've got this beautiful three-dimensional carving, and what we've really done by painting like this is we flattened it out by putting, all the same colors on it. So this is going to be, I might actually have to go grab some other paint. I forgot one color out in the garage. But and for you guys, that if you don't paint a lot, I would find a local, even go take a Bob Ross class. Bob Ross classes are awesome, but they're in oil paints, which is different than acrylics. But if you can find a good acrylic artist, go to the art store and ask them if they have classes in using acrylics. I'd go take one and learn to paint on flat canvases. I started painting on canvases years ago because I knew I wanted to get better at painting carvings, because my first love was always carvings, and then so I found a guy named Bill Cross, and Bill Cross is a longtime Alaskan artist, and I found him in the mall one day, and he was giving classes here in town. And as I got to know Bill, it turns out Bill's a guy who taught Bob Ross how to do what he did. And Bob was, if you don't know the history of Bob Ross was a sergeant in the Air Force, and was up in Fairbanks, Alaska, and that's how he ended up running into Bill Cross. So Bill Cross had spent some time with Bob Ross, and if you listen to all of Bob's tapes, occasionally you will hear him talk about crossing stuff up, which is just his some of the detail techniques that Bill Cross that Bill taught him over the years. So I had a chance to paint with Bill, Mr. Cross, for quite a few years before he finally passed away. So aside from just dropping paint on and smearing it like a house painter would do, I do a lot of poking with the brush. So you'll see me just dabbing the end of it, because it spreads the hairs out and you get the illusion of detail on some of this. And you can see it if I won't see it there because it's, but on the elk, you'll see it. If I just want, I want to soften up this line between, it's just too much an abrupt line where the and then again, just like the raised letters and stuff stick up and you go wide. Now you want to try to create the illusion of, let's look at the elk's mane for a couple minutes. I've loaded up my brush with some lighter paint, and I'm going to just slide it across. And you can see what it does is it just picks up the higher areas like that. So I'm not entirely tickled with how that turned out. So I'm going to take some of that off. I'm going to go back in with my Payne's Gray and darken up a few spots where I want that to. So the other thing you'll play a lot with is the viscosity of the paint you're dealing with, how much water you put on it, and how much just pure pigment you let play on here. So if you have a lot of water in the paint, it's more like just a wash, and it doesn't it doesn't cover as completely. So I got a little bit of red in there right now because I want some of that showing up, and I'm going to put quite a bit of red in. I'm mixing some orange down here right now with red and yellow because I got some white in it and it got all pink. So I'm cleaning off my brush again with these rags. I go through them like crazy, but so I'm mixing some orange and yellow on a clean brush, red and yellow to make orange. And I want to kind of pick up some of these areas where the sun might be coming through on the and just touching part of the elk like that. So it's a little bit of sunshine coming through. And then some of this comes with, as you do more and more of these things, you'll start, like I can see there's some shadows here that need some help to help form the shape of the elk. And I haven't even tried to do the eye yet, but it's right in there somewhere. So I still go back from time to time when I find stuff. As you're working on this, you'll find out areas you missed or just want to clean up. Mr. Bill Cross calls these little brushes the money brushes. So it's after you've kind of blocked in the big bulk of the painting, you come back in with the money brushes and spend some time putting in highlights and where there might be some light shining through and a lot of stuff Bob Ross talks about. Some wheat down here that's in front of the elk, so we'll get that back in. And you can see just by passing the brush over it kind of quickly, you can see it picks up part of it and leaves the dark areas underneath. All right, I'll get you up here closer. You can get a closer look at that and see just what. There we go. So not a lot of time into that at this point. The shadows are really heavy with the single light over top, so the antlers look much bigger than they are. I'll tilt the light a little bit for you here in a minute. But from this point on, then I would play with just details on the elk. That's about all I would really do from here. Get the color right. But that's the basics how I put paint on a piece. And it doesn't have to take you forever. You don't need to use tiny little brushes and paint every hair one at a time, and you can get some pretty cool results. So some more light on these antlers here and try to get the That's just touching up some of the letters really quick, but some of the edges. But other than that, I do like to get some really washed out blue and turning it very watery. I'll show you this down here for a minute. So I've mixed this is very wet right now. I've mixed it with a little bit of Payne's Gray. You can see I'm spreading it out on that. It's very light. And I'm going to use that to create some shadows on this elk. Just down in these areas here. Where they would there'd be no sun shining. And that's that. So that's a kind of a quick run through on how I do 3D paintings with acrylics. And then I'll mop that off tomorrow and do a couple touch-ups on it quick, and then I'll seal it. So thanks for watching, and you can email me questions.